It was late October in Hollow Creek, a sleepy Midwest town where the hospital sat like a tired old man on the edge of decay. The air buzzed with unease that night as Eleanor Hayes, a rookie nurse, clocked in for her graveyard shift at St. Agnes Memorial. She'd heard the rumors, whispers about room 13 where patients swore the bed moved on its own. By 2 a.m., she'd learned those whispers weren't just stories. They were warnings. Eleanor adjusted her scrubs, her sneakers squeaking on the chipped linoleum as she passed the nurse's station. The lights flickered faintly, a hum threading through the halls like a pulse. "Room 13's empty tonight," said Nurse Thomas, his voice low, eyes darting to the shadowed corridor. "Good," she replied, brushing it off. She didn't believe in ghost stories. Not yet. But the unease clung to her like damp fog as she made her rounds. By midnight, the hospital felt alive in all the wrong ways. Machines beeped erratically, though no one touched them. Shadows stretched too long across the walls. Eleanor paused outside room 13. Its door cracked open despite Thomas's claim. A faint creak echoed from inside, rhythmic, deliberate, like a rocking chair. Her pulse quickened. She pushed the door wider, revealing the bed, old, iron-framed, its mattress sagging under an invisible weight. The creaking stopped. Silence pressed in, thick and suffocating. "Probably just the wind," she muttered, stepping inside. The air turned frigid, her breath clouding in front of her. Then she saw it, the sheets twitching, rippling like water disturbed by an unseen hand. Her stomach dropped. She backed away, but the door slammed shut behind her, the lock clicking with a finality that echoed in her bones. Panic clawed at her throat as the bed began to shudder, its frame scraping the floor like nails on a chalkboard. She fumbled for her keys, but they slipped from her shaking hands, clattering uselessly. The bed lurched forward, inching toward her with a groan that sounded too human, too alive. "This isn't happening," she whispered, but the room answered with a low, guttural laugh that vibrated through the walls. She pressed herself against the door, heart hammering, as the bed stopped inches from her feet. The sheets lifted, revealing nothing beneath, no body, no form, just darkness that pulsed like a heartbeat. Eleanor's scream caught in her throat as the darkness stretched upward, forming a vague humanoid shape. Its edges shimmered, unstable, like heat rising off asphalt. "You shouldn't have come here," it rasped, its voice a chorus of whispers, layered over a scream. She bolted for the window, but the glass wouldn't budge. Frost crept across it, spelling out a single word: "Stay." The bed rattled violently now, its frame bending as if alive, metal screeching like a wounded animal. Desperate, she grabbed a chair and smashed it against the window. The glass shattered, cold air rushing in, but the darkness lunged, wrapping around her ankle like a hand. She kicked free, scrambling onto the ledge, the two-story drop below her, only chance. The bed slammed against the wall, the entity's voice rising to a shriek, "You can't leave." She jumped, the ground rushing up fast. She hit the grass hard, pain exploding in her leg, but she was alive. Above her, the window framed the bed, now still, its sheets flat and empty. She limped away, the hospital looming behind her like a predator waiting to strike again. At the nurse's station, Thomas found her, pale and trembling. "What happened?" he asked. She couldn't speak, just pointed at room 13. The next night they sealed the room shut, boarding the door with steel plates. But at 2 a.m., the creaking started again, louder, angrier, seeping through the walls. Patients complained of nightmares, visions of a bed that wouldn't stay still, a shadow that whispered their names. Eleanor quit that week, moving 3 states away, but she still woke to that creaking sound some nights, faint and far off, like it was following her. Years later, a janitor broke into room 13 on a dare. They found him the next morning, sprawled, across the bed, eyes wide open, mouth frozen in a silent scream. The sheets were tangled around him impossibly tight, like they'd held him down. No one could explain the marks on his neck, long, thin scratches, as if something invisible had gripped him too hard. The hospital shut down soon after, abandoned, to rot in Hollow Creek's endless silence. But the bed didn't leave. Urban legends spread, how it showed up in thrift stores or roadside sales, its iron frame gleaming like new, waiting for someone foolish enough to take it home. They say it creaks at night wherever it goes, and if you hear it, it's already too late. Eleanor swears she saw it once, in a junkyard 2 towns over, its sheets fluttering in the wind like a beckoning hand. She didn't stop to check. The truth about that bed goes deeper than anyone in Hollow Creek dared to dig. Decades before Eleanor's night, a patient, James Carter, died in room 13, strapped to that very bed. He'd been a quiet man, admitted for a broken leg, but something changed him. Nurses found him muttering about the weight that wouldn't lift, his eyes wild with terror. The night he died, the bed shook so violently it cracked the floor, and his screams echoed for hours after his heart stopped. No autopsy was done. Too much fear hung over the staff. But the orderlies who moved his body swore the sheets clung to him like they didn't want to let go. Some say James's spirit never left. That bed became his prison, a cursed anchor, trapping him between worlds. Others think it's something older, something the hospital was built over, awakened by his death. Either way, it feeds on fear, and it doesn't rest. Eleanor tried to warn people, but no one listened. The bed kept moving, surfacing in strange places, a garage sale in Ohio, a flea market in Kentucky, always pristine, always waiting. Those who slept in it never woke the same. One man claimed it whispered his name all night. Another said it dragged him under the sheets, pinning him until dawn. Each story ended the same. The bed vanished, leaving only terror behind. Now Hollow Creek's hospital is a husk, its windows black and empty, but the locals know better than to go near it. They've seen the bed out there in the wild, on back roads, in barns, even in dreams. It's not just a bed anymore, it's a hunter. And if you're ever in the Midwest browsing some dusty sale, don't trust anything that looks too perfect. Check the frame. Listen for a creak. If you feel that chill, run, because once it locks onto you, it won't stop. Eleanor knows. She still hears it sometimes, faint in the distance, a reminder that it's never far. The hospital might be gone, but the curse lives on, carried by that bed waiting for its next victim. So here's the warning. Don't trust this bed. Don't touch it, don't buy it, don't even look at it too long. It's out there right now, in some forgotten corner. Its sheets crisp, its frame gleaming, whispering to anyone who gets too close. Ignore it and you might walk away. But if you hear that creak, soft, slow, deliberate, run. Run and don't look back because it's already chosen you. If you're ever in Hollow Creek, don't go near that old hospital. Don't touch anything you find there, especially not a bed that looks too good to be true. It's not just a story. It's a curse, and it's still out there, waiting for its next sleeper. You've been warned, heed it, or pay the price. That creak isn't the wind. It's the last sound you'll hear before it takes you too. The fog rolled thick over Mercy General in Savannah, Georgia, on a humid November night in 1987. Dr. Thomas Reed, a weary resident, shuffled through the dim halls, his clipboard heavy with the day's notes. The hospital was old, its walls stained, with decades of secrets, but one chart, room 7's, kept showing up where it shouldn't. By dawn, Thomas would wish he'd never picked it up. He'd found it first at the nurse's station, a faded manila folder with no name, just room 7 scrawled in red ink that looked too fresh. Inside were pages of scribbled notes, dates stretching back to 1932, patient symptoms like screams, at shadows, and eyes won't close. Thomas frowned, flipping through it under the flickering fluorescent light. "Who left this here?" he muttered. But the station was empty, the night shift eerily quiet. He carried it to room 7, a cramped space with peeling paint and a single bed, empty since the last patient coded there 2 nights ago. He set the chart on the bedside table, but as he turned to leave, a faint scratching sound stopped him. It came from the chart, like a pen moving on its own. He spun back, heart thudding, and saw fresh ink bleeding across the page. Thomas, stay. He stumbled back, the air growing heavy, thick with the smell of antiseptic and something sour. The lights dimmed, casting jagged shadows that didn't match the room's shape. "This is ridiculous," he said, grabbing the chart to toss it away. But the folder wouldn't budge. It stuck to the table like it was glued. His fingers brushed the paper and a jolt shot up his arm, cold, sharp, alive. The scratching grew louder, frantic, and the chart flipped open on its own, pages rustling like dry leaves. Words scrawled themselves in real time. "You're next." Thomas dropped it, backing toward the door, but the knob wouldn't turn. A low moan rose from the bed, empty, yet the sheets shifted, outlining a form that wasn't there. His breath hitched as the chart slid off the table, landing at his feet, open to a new page. "Look behind you." He didn't want to, but his head turned anyway, slow and mechanical. In the corner, where the shadows pooled darkest, two eyes gleamed, white, unblinking, floating in the void. A voice whispered his name, soft and wet like it came from drowned lungs. The chart trembled on the floor, ink pooling into a sketch, a crude drawing of his own face, eyes hollow, mouth stretched in a scream. Thomas bolted, slamming his shoulder into the door until it gave way, spilling him into the hall. The chart stayed behind, but its whispers followed, curling around his ears like smoke. He ran to the break room, hands shaking as he poured coffee he wouldn't drink. Nurse Clara found him there, pale and muttering. "You okay, Doc?" she asked. He nodded, lying, but then she gasped. "Where'd you get that?" She pointed at his clipboard. The chart was there again, tucked among his papers, its red ink glistening wet. He threw it across the room, pages scattering, but they didn't stop moving. Each one crawled back toward him, slow and deliberate. Clara screamed, backing away as the lights buzzed and died. In the dark, the scratching returned, louder, closer, etching words into the silence. "You can't run." Thomas grabbed a flashlight and fled to the basement, where the hospital kept old records. If this thing had a source, he'd find it. The air down there was damp, the shelves lined with moldy boxes. He tore through them, finding a file from 1932. A patient, Eleanor Price, admitted to room 7 with hysteria. Her notes described a chart she wouldn't let go, claiming it wrote her death. She died clutching it, her body found cold, the chart gone. The flashlight flickered as the scratching echoed again, now from the shelves. He turned and there it was, the chart, perched atop a box, its pages flipping wildly. A shadow loomed behind it, tall, thin, with those white eyes burning through the dark. "You touched it," it hissed, voice dripping with malice. "Now it's yours." The chart flew at him, pages wrapping around his wrists like shackles, ink staining his skin. He fought, tearing at the paper, but it tightened, cutting deep. The shadow grew, filling the room, its eyes inches from his. "Write," it commanded, and his hand moved against his will, grabbing a pen from his pocket. He scrawled on the chart, "Thomas Reed died 1987, his own obituary," the ink turning red as blood seeped from his fingers. The shadow laughed, a sound like breaking glass. He staggered upstairs, the chart still clinging to him, its weight dragging him down. The halls were empty, the hospital silent except for that relentless scratching. He collapsed in room 7, the chart falling open beside him. His vision blurred as the shadow leaned over him, whispering, "Finished." The last thing he saw was the chart, his name etched in crimson, the date complete. They found him at dawn, cold and still, the chart gone. Nurses whispered about it for years, how it reappeared on random nights, always in room 7, always blank until someone touched it. Clara swore she saw it once, years later, its red ink glowing. In the dark, she quit the next day. Mercy General closed in 92, its halls left to rot under Savannah's oppressive heat, but the chart didn't stay buried. Antique dealers found it in a thrift shop in 95, its pages crisp and empty, begging to be touched. A collector bought it, only to vanish 3 days later, his wife claiming he'd screamed about eyes in the walls. It surfaced again in A garage sale in '03, then a flea market in '19. Always moving, always waiting. They say it's tied to Eleanor Price, her death a spark that cursed it forever. Or maybe it's older, something the hospital's foundation disturbed, a ledger of the damned hungry for names. Either way, it doesn't rest. It finds you, slips into your life, an innocent folder on a shelf, a bargain at a sale. If you see it, manila worn with red ink that never dries, don't touch it. Don't open it. Don't read it. Don't even linger too long. Walk away fast, because once your fingers brush that paper, it knows you. The scratching starts, the eyes appear, and your name gets added to its list. Thomas learned too late. His grave's in Savannah, unmarked, forgotten. Except by the chart. It's still out there somewhere in the South, waiting for the next curious soul. People whisper about it in hushed tones, how it moves through thrift stores, how it finds those who can't resist a mystery. Don't be that person. If you're in an old hospital, an attic, a dusty shop, and you spot that chart, red ink, no name, leave it alone. It's not just paper. It's a trap, a curse that writes itself with your blood. The scratching doesn't stop. The eyes don't blink. And once it has you, there's no escape. So here's the rule. Don't touch this chart. Not in Mercy General, not anywhere. It's out there now, lurking in plain sight, its pages blank until you make the mistake. Ignore that itch to look closer, run instead. Because if you hear that scratching, soft and steady, it's already too late. If you're ever near Savannah, don't go digging through old records. Don't pick up anything that feels wrong, especially not a chart with red ink that won't fade. It's not a relic. It's alive, and it's hunting. You've been told, heed it or join Thomas in the dark. That scratching isn't random, it's your name being written next. Mercy General's gone, but the chart isn't. It's still out there, waiting for you to slip. Don't touch it, ever, or it'll touch you back and it won't let go. Rain battered the windows of St. Mary's Hospital in rural Vermont on a bitter March night in 1994. James Carter, a janitor with tired eyes, mopped the third-floor hallway, the fluorescent lights buzzing like angry wasps. He'd found a patient gown crumpled in a closet earlier, pale blue stained with something dark. By midnight, he'd regret ever putting it on. The hospital was short-staffed, and James often worked alone, the silence broken only by distant coughs and the hum of machines. The gown had been a whim. He'd slipped it over his uniform to stay warm, its fabric oddly soft despite the stains. But as he pushed his cart past room 312, a chill crawled up his spine, sharp and sudden. He stopped, glancing at the door, cracked open, though it should have been locked. Inside, the bed was empty, but the gown tightened around him like a hand squeezing his chest. He tugged at it, but the ties wouldn't budge. They knotted tighter, digging into his skin. A faint whisper brushed his ear. "Stay with us." James stumbled back, his mop clattering to the floor. The lights flickered, casting long shadows that twisted like fingers reaching for him. He tore at the gown, but it clung like a second skin, the stains spreading, dark red now, wet and warm. His breath fogged in the air, though the heat was on. The whisper grew louder. "You're ours now." He ran, the gown flapping against his legs, heavier with every step. The hallway stretched, endless, the doors blurring past him. He reached the stairwell, but the gown yanked him back, slamming him against the wall. Pain flared in his ribs as the fabric pulsed, alive, tightening until he couldn't breathe. Shadows gathered at the hall's end, vague shapes, human but wrong, their eyes glinting like wet glass. "Who's there?" He croaked, but the gown answered, a sharp tug that dragged him toward room 312. The door swung wide, revealing the bed now occupied, a figure beneath the sheets, still, silent, but watching. The gown forced him inside, the air thick with the stench of decay. He clawed at it, nails tearing, but the fabric stitched itself back, stronger, tighter. The figure sat up, pale, eyeless, its mouth a black slit. "You wore it," it rasped, voice like rustling leaves. "Now you stay." The gown burned against his skin, the stains seeping into him cold and slick. He screamed, but the sound died in his throat as the shadows closed in. Dozens now, all wearing identical gowns, their faces blank, their hands reaching. James kicked at the bed, desperate, but the gown pulled him down, pinning him to the floor. The figure leaned closer, its breath a damp rattle. "We died in these, it said. Now you will too." The gown tightened again, crushing his chest, and he felt his ribs crack. The shadows pressed in, their fingers cold as they traced the stains on his gown. Stains that weren't just blood, but something older, darker. He crawled toward the door, lungs burning, but the gown dragged him back, its fabric stretching, impossibly long. The figure stood, its gown dripping onto the floor, a puddle of black that spread toward him. "You can't leave," it whispered, and the shadows echoed it, a chorus of hollow voices. The gown tightened until he saw stars, his vision fading as the stains burned deeper. In a last surge, James grabbed a scalpel from a tray and slashed at the gown. The fabric shrieked, a human sound, and loosened just enough for him to rip it off. He stumbled out, the gown writhing on the floor like a dying thing. The shadows lunged, but he made it to the stairwell, collapsing as the door slammed shut behind him. He woke in the break room, Nurse Eleanor shaking him. "James, what happened?" she asked, her eyes wide. He pointed upstairs, gasping. "The gown. Don't touch it." She went to check, but room 312 was empty. No gown, no figure, just a faint stain on the floor. James quit that night, but the cold never left him. He felt it in his bones for years. The gown reappeared weeks later, folded neatly in a supply closet. A new orderly wore it, and they found him in room 312, cold, his gown stained black, eyes wide open. The hospital hushed it up, but the staff knew. Something lived in that fabric, something tied to the patients who died in it decades ago. St. Mary's closed in '99, its halls left to the wind and rot. But the gown didn't stay gone. It turned up in a thrift store in Burlington in 2001, then a garage sale in Maine in '08. Always pale blue, always stained, always waiting. A woman bought it once, said it whispered her name all night. She burned it, but the ashes reformed by morning. They say it's cursed by the dead, patients who suffered in St. Mary's, their pain woven into the threads. Or maybe it's older, something the hospital unearthed when they built over an unmarked graveyard. Either way, it hunts, slipping into the world like a ghost in plain sight. If you see it, pale blue, soft with stains that shift, don't wear it, don't touch it, don't take it home, don't think it's just a gown. Walk away, because once it's on you, it owns you. The whispers start, the shadows come, and your breath stops. James escaped, but barely. He still dreams of it. Cold fabric, eyeless faces, that endless pull. The gown's out there now in some dusty corner of New England, waiting for the next fool. People whisper about it. How it moves, how it finds you when you're alone. Don't be that fool. If you're in a thrift store, a hospital basement, anywhere, and you spot that gown, stained, too soft, leave it be. It's not just cloth. It's a shroud, alive with the dead, and it wants you next. The stains don't wash out. The whispers don't fade, and once it's on, there's no getting it off. So here's the warning. Don't wear this gown. Not in St. Mary's, not anywhere. It's out there right now, folded neat, waiting for you to slip it on. Ignore that urge. Run, instead. Because if you feel that cold grip, it's already too late. If you're ever in Vermont, don't rummage through old closets. Don't pick up anything that feels alive, especially not a gown with stains that bleed. It's not a keepsake, it's a curse, and it's hunting. You've been warned. Heed it or join the shadows in room 312. That whisper isn't the wind. It's your name being called. St. Mary's is gone, but the gown isn't. It's still out there waiting for you to try it on. Don't wear it, ever, or it'll wear you instead, and it won't let go. James knows. He still feels it some nights, cold and tight, a memory that won't fade. The gown's alive and it's patient. It'll wait in thrift stores, attics, anywhere you might find it. Don't give it the chance. That soft fabric hides something hungry, something that stains more than cloth, it stains your soul. So listen close. Don't wear this gown. Leave it where it lies, or it'll take you where you can't come back from. It's waiting out there now, stained and silent. Until you make the mistake, don't let it be you. If you hear that whisper, soft, cold calling, run. Run and don't stop, because the gown doesn't just fit, it claims. And once it does, you're one of them. Another shadow in its endless parade. Don't wear this gown. Ever. It's not worth the warmth, not worth the curiosity. It's a trap stitched with the dead, and it's still out there waiting for you to slip it on. Heed this, or join James in the cold. That stain isn't just blood. It's you. Vermont's quiet, but the gown isn't. It's hunting still. The wind howled through the cracked windows of Blackwood County Hospital in northern Oregon on a frigid December night in 1978. Nurse Clara Evans, a veteran of too many late shifts, adjusted her cap as she wheeled a cart down the fifth-floor corridor. She'd noticed the mirror earlier, a small, tarnished thing left in room 509. By 3 a.m., she'd wished she'd never looked into it. The hospital was a crumbling relic, its walls whispering with the groans of dying timber towns. Clara had seen plenty of oddities in her years, charts misplaced, lights flickering, but that mirror felt different. It was old, its frame etched with faint scratches, the glass cloudy like a fogged eye. She'd picked it up to clean it, her reflection barely visible in the haze. She set it on the bedside table in room 509, a space empty since a patient vanished. Last week, no trace, just rumors of screams. As she turned to leave, a faint tap echoed from the mirror, like fingernails on glass. She froze, glancing back. The surface rippled and her reflection blinked, slowly, deliberately, when she hadn't. Clara's heart skipped, but she shook it off. "Tired eyes," she muttered, stepping into the hall. The lights dimmed, a hum rising like a swarm of flies. She glanced at her watch, 2:47 a.m., and felt a pull like the mirror was calling her back. Against her better judgment, she returned, peering into it again. This time her reflection smiled, a thin, wrong smile, while her own lips stayed still. She dropped it, the mirror clattering but not breaking. A voice hissed from it, low, garbled like it came from underwater. "Look closer." The glass cleared, revealing not her face but a room, dark, endless, with shapes moving in the shadows. Hands pressed against the surface from the other side, pale and claw-like, smearing the glass with streaks of black. Clara backed away, but the mirror slid across the table following her. The air turned cold, her breath frosting as the voice grew louder. "You saw us." She ran, the mirrors tapping, chasing her down the hall, faster, insistent. She reached the nurse's station, but it was there. On the desk, glass gleaming, her reflection now pounding on the inside, mouthing her name. She grabbed a phone to call security, but the line buzzed with static, and that voice, "We're waiting." The mirror tilted and she saw them. Figures in hospital gowns, faces blurred, eyes hollow, crowding the glass. One reached out, its hand breaking through, pale fingers curling into the room. Clara screamed, stumbling back as the hand clawed the air. The lights died, plunging her into darkness, the tapping now a drumbeat. She fumbled for a flashlight, its beam catching the mirror, now on the floor, growing larger, the glass stretching, like a gaping maw. Hands poured out, dozens of them, dragging shadowy forms into the room. Patients long dead, their gowns stained with decades of rot. "You looked," they chanted, voices overlapping in a wet rasp. Clara bolted for the stairs, but the mirror appeared ahead, blocking her path. Her reflection stepped out, a twisted twin with black eyes and a grin too wide. "Stay," it said, grabbing her wrist. Its touch burned, ice cold, and she felt herself slipping, her body growing heavy as the mirror pulsed. The figures closed, their hands pulling her toward the glass. She fought, kicking at her reflection, but it laughed, a hollow, echoing sound. The mirror sucked at her, the edges warping as she clawed the floor. In a final surge, she grabbed a chair and smashed it into the glass. The mirror shattered, a scream ripping through the air as the figures dissolved into smoke. She collapsed, shards cutting her hands, the silence deafening. She crawled to the stairwell, blood dripping, and made it to the first floor. Orderly Thomas found her, pale and trembling. "What happened?" he asked. "The mirror," she gasped. "Don't use it." He went up to check, but room 509 was empty. No mirror, just scratches on the table like claw marks. Clara took a week off, but the tapping haunted her dreams. The mirror reappeared months later, intact in a storage room. A new nurse used it to fix her hair, and vanished that night, her screams echoing through the halls. The staff locked it in the basement, but it wouldn't stay there. Kept showing up in random rooms, always cloudy, always tapping. Blackwood County shut down in '85, its bones left to the Oregon rain. But the mirror didn't die. It surfaced. In a pawn shop in '89, then a flea market in '97, always small, tarnished, waiting. A man bought it once, said his reflection tried to pull him through. He smashed it, but it was back on his shelf by dawn. They say it's a window to the patients who disappeared in Blackwood, trapped in its glass forever. Or maybe it's older. Something dug up when the hospital was built. A portal to somewhere worse. Either way, it waits, slipping into the world like a quiet predator. If you see it, small, scratched with cloudy glass, don't use it. Don't look in it, don't touch it, don't bring it home. Walk away, because once you stare too long, it sees you back. The tapping starts, the hands reach, and you're gone. Clara survived, but barely. She still hears it. Soft taps in the night, a reflection that isn't hers. The mirror's out there now, in some dusty shop or attic, waiting for the next gaze. People whisper about it, how it moves, how it takes you when you're alone. Don't be that person. If you're in an old hospital, a thrift store, anywhere, and you spot that mirror, tarnished, wrong, leave it alone. It's not just glass, it's a door, alive with the lost, and it wants you next. The haze doesn't hide your face, it hides them. So here's the rule. Never use this mirror. Not in Blackwood, not anywhere. It's out there now, silent until you look too close. Ignore that urge, run instead. Because if you hear that tap, soft and steady, it's already too late. If you're ever in Oregon, don't pick up old mirrors. Don't stare into anything that feels off, especially not one with scratches that move. It's not a relic, it's a trap, and it's hunting. You've been warned, heed it, or join the shadows in room 509. That tap isn't random, it's your name being called. Blackwood's gone, but the mirror isn't. It's still out there, waiting for you to look. Don't use it, ever, or it'll use you instead and it won't let go. Clara knows. She still sees it in her sleep, tapping to get out. The mirror's patient, and it's clever. It'll sit in pawn shops, basements, anywhere you might find it. Don't give it a chance. That cloudy glass hides more than your face. It hides a prison waiting to claim you. So listen well. Never use this mirror. Leave it where it lies, or it'll take you where you can't escape. It's waiting out there now, small and silent, until you make the mistake. Don't let it be you. If you hear that tap, soft, cold, calling, run. Run and don't stop, because the mirror doesn't just reflect, it steals. And once it does, you're one of them. Another face behind the glass. Never use this mirror, ever. It's not worth the glance, not worth the curiosity. It's a cage forged with the lost, and it's still out there waiting for you to peek. Heed this or join Clara in the dark. That reflection isn't you, it's them. Oregon's wild, but the mirror is wilder. It's hunting still, patient and cold, its glass cloudy until you look too long. Don't do it. Leave it be, or it'll take you too. The tapping never stops, not until you're theirs. Blackwood's a memory, but the mirror's alive. It's out there waiting for your eyes. Don't give it them. Snow fell heavy over Pine Hollow Hospital in upstate New York on a bleak January evening in 1965. Eleanor Price, a young orderly, pushed a linen cart through the basement halls, her footsteps echoing off the damp concrete. She'd been warned about the rusted door at the corridor's end, locked for years unmarked. By night's end, she'd wish she'd heeded that warning. The hospital was a maze of cold walls and flickering bulbs, its basement a tomb for forgotten things. Eleanor had heard the stories, staff vanishing, whispers from behind that door, but she dismissed them as gossip. Tonight, though, the air felt wrong, thick with a hum she couldn't place. She paused by the door, its rust flaking like dried blood. A faint knock came from the other side, soft, deliberate. Eleanor froze, her hand hovering over the cart. "Hello?" she called, voice trembling. The knock repeated, louder, and the lock clicked open on its own. Her breath caught as the door creaked ajar, revealing only darkness, a black so deep it swallowed the light. She stepped back, but a voice whispered from the void, "Help us." It was thin, desperate, layered with others, dozens, maybe hundreds. Her skin prickled as the air grew colder, the hum now a low growl. She grabbed the handle to slam it shut, but it wouldn't budge. The door pushed back, forcing her hand away. A shadow moved inside, tall, thin, its edges blurring like smoke. "You hear us," it said, voice echoing in her skull. The door swung wider, and hands reached out. Pale, skeletal, nails black and cracked. Eleanor stumbled back, her cart tipping as she ran. The hands clawed the air, the whispers rising to a scream. "Don't leave!" She reached the stairs, but the door slammed open behind her, the sound shaking the walls. Footsteps followed, slow, wet, like bare feet on damp stone. She glanced back, and the shadow was closer, its face a smear of white, eyes glowing like embers. The hand stretched longer, brushing her ankle. She tripped, falling hard, her scream swallowed by the growl. The lights flickered out, plunging her into black. The whispers filled the dark, names, pleas, curses pressing against her mind. She crawled, hands scraping the floor, as the shadow loomed above her. "You opened it," it hissed, breath cold on her neck. The hands grabbed her now, pulling her back toward the door, their grip like ice and iron. Eleanor kicked, her boot hitting something soft that groaned, a human sound. She twisted free, scrambling up the stairs as the lights buzzed back on. The shadow shrieked, retreating into the doorway, but the hands lingered, clawing the steps. She reached the first floor, slamming the basement door shut, her heart pounding like a drum. She found Nurse Thomas at the station, his face pale as she gasped. "The door, don't go down there." He frowned, grabbing a flashlight. "Stay here," he said, heading below. Minutes later, he returned, shaken. "It's locked again," he muttered. "But there's scratches. Fresh ones." Eleanor quit that week, but the whispers followed her home. The door stayed locked after that, or so they thought. In '67, a janitor opened it on a dare. They found his shoes by the stairs, nothing else. The hospital sealed it with steel plates in '70, but at night staff heard knocks, soft, then frantic, seeping through the walls. Pine Hollow closed in '73, abandoned to the snow and silence, but the door didn't stay shut. In '79, scavengers broke in, pried the plates off. One came back babbling about hands in the dark. The others didn't. Since then, it's been seen elsewhere, rusted, unmarked, showing up in old buildings, cellars, even homes. A teen opened it in '92, vanished by morning, his screams etched into his sister's memory. They say it's a gate to the patients lost in Pine Hollow, trapped behind it since the hospital's early days. Or maybe it's older, something the builders sealed by mistake, a passage to nowhere good. Either way, it waits, moving through the world like a quiet curse. If you see it, rusted, locked with no sign, don't open it. Don't touch it. Don't listen to the knocks. Don't think it's just a door. Walk away, because once it unlocks, it claims you. The whispers call, the hands pull, and you're gone. Eleanor escaped, but barely. She still hears it, soft knocks in the dark, voices begging her back. The door's out there now in some forgotten place, waiting for the next hand. People whisper about it, how it moves, how it takes you when you're curious. Don't be that curious. If you're in an old hospital, a basement, anywhere, and you spot that door, rusted, wrong, leave it be. It's not just metal. It's a mouth, alive with the lost, and it wants you next. The knocks aren't help. They're hunger. So here's the rule. Don't open this door. Not in Pine Hollow. Not anywhere. It's out there now, silent until you turn the knob. Ignore that itch. Run instead. Because if you hear that click, it's already too late. If you're ever in New York, don't explore old basements. Don't touch doors that feel alive, especially not one that knocks back. It's not a mystery, it's a trap, and it's hunting. You've been warned, heed it, or join the whispers behind it. That knock isn't random, it's your name being called. Pine Hollow's gone, but the door isn't. It's still out there waiting for you to try it. Don't open it, ever, or it'll open you instead, and it won't let go. Eleanor knows she still feels it some nights, cold and close. The door's patient and it's clever. It'll wait in ruins, cellars, anywhere you might find it. Don't give it a chance. That rust hides more than age. It hides a hunger waiting to pull you in. So listen well. Don't open this door. Leave it where it stands, or it'll take you where you can't return. It's waiting out there now, rusted and silent, until you make the mistake. Don't let it be you. If you hear that knock, soft, cold calling, run. Run and don't stop, because the door doesn't just open, it devours. And once it does, you're one of them. Another voice in its endless choir. Don't open this door, ever. It's not worth the look, not worth the dare. It's a cage forged with the lost, and it's still out there waiting for you to turn the handle. Heed this or join Eleanor in the dark. That whisper isn't help. It's them. New York's vast, but the door is vaster. It's hunting still. Patient and cold, it's locked loose until you come too close. Don't do it, leave it be, or it'll take you too. The knocks never stop, not until you're theirs. Pine Hollow's a ghost, but the door's alive. It's out there waiting for your hand. Don't give it one. That rust isn't decay. It's a promise of what's inside. So hear me now. Don't open this door. It's not a way out, it's a way in. And once you're in, there's no way out. It's waiting still, somewhere cold and dark for you to knock back. If you feel that pull, run. Run fast, because the door doesn't ask, it takes. And it's taken too many already. Don't be next. That knock is a lure and the hands are waiting. Don't open this door. Leave it shut, or it'll open you to something you can't unsee. It's out there now, rusted and ready, until you make the choice. Choose wisely. The door's alive, and it's hungry. It'll wait forever if it has to. Don't give it forever, don't give it a second. That whisper is a lie, and the dark is full. So one last time. Don't open this door. It's not worth it. Nothing is. It's still out there, waiting for you to slip. Don't slip. That knock is the end, and it's knocking for you. Mist clung to the hills around Crestwood Medical Center in Northern California on a damp April morning in 1983. Thomas Blake, a maintenance worker with grease-stained hands, trudged through the sub-basement, his boots splashing in shallow puddles. He'd been sent to fix a leaking pipe, old, rusted, dripping into a dented bucket. By noon, he'd wish he'd never tasted that water. The hospital was a sprawl of cracked concrete and buzzing lights, its sub-basement a warren of pipes and shadows. Thomas had worked there for years, used to the damp and the dark, but that pipe felt off. Its water was warm, murky, with a faint metallic tang. He wiped sweat from his brow, the heat making him thirsty, and scooped a handful from the bucket. It hit his tongue like copper and salt, bitter enough to make him wince. He spat half out, but some slid down his throat, leaving a slick burn. The lights flickered, a hum rising from the pipes like a distant moan. He shook it off, muttering, "Bad plumbing," and tightened the valve. But then his stomach twisted, sharp, sudden, like claws inside him. He doubled over, gripping the pipe as a voice whispered in his head, "You drank us." It was low, wet, layered with echoes, too many to count. The water in the bucket rippled, though nothing touched it, and shapes formed, faces, faint and blurred, pressing against the surface. Thomas staggered back, his pulse racing as the hum grew louder. The faces sharpened, eyes wide, mouths open, pleading. "We're still here," they hissed, their voices now in his chest, vibrating his ribs. His skin burned, sweat turning cold as the water in the bucket darkened, thick like ink. He grabbed his wrench, but it slipped from his shaking hands, clanging into the puddle. The splash echoed too long, too alive. He ran, the water sloshing, behind him chasing his steps. The pipes rattled, leaking faster, the warm drip turning to a steady stream. His throat tightened, the taste spreading, bitter, wrong, alive. The voices grew louder. "You're ours now." He reached the stairs, but the water followed, pooling at his feet, warm and heavy like blood. The lights died, plunging him into dark, the hum now a roar. He fumbled for his flashlight, its beam catching the water, moving, rising, forming hands that clawed the air. Faces surfaced, pale, eyeless, mouths gaping in silent screams. "We drowned," they rasped, their grip cold as they brushed his legs. Thomas kicked, but the water clung, pulling him down. He crawled up the stairs, the liquid surging thick with shadows. His stomach churned, the burn spreading to his lungs, his heart. "You drank us," they chanted, voices now inside. Him clawing at his mind. The water rose higher, hands wrapping his ankles, dragging him back. He screamed, but it came out wet, choking like he was drowning from within. In a last surge, he broke free, slamming the sub-basement door shut. The water pounded against it, seeping through the cracks, the voices shrieking, "You can't leave!" He stumbled to the break room, collapsing as Nurse Clara found him, pale and gasping. "The water, don't touch it," he croaked, his throat raw with that taste. She checked the sub-basement, but the pipe was dry, the bucket empty, no leak. Just damp stains on the floor. Thomas quit that day, but the burn never left him. He felt it in his veins for years. The hospital replaced the pipe in '84, but staff swore the water still tasted off. Warm, bitter, wrong. Crestwood shut down in '89, its halls left to rot in the mist. But the water didn't stay gone. In '91, a hiker found a spring nearby, warm and murky, and drank from it. Vanished by dusk, his screams echoing through the trees. It surfaced again in a well in '98. Then a faucet in '06, always warm, always bitter, always waiting. They say it's the dead, patients who perished in Crestwood, their blood seeping into the pipes decades ago. Or maybe it's older, something the hospital tapped into, a vein of something cursed. Either way, it flows, finding its way into the world like a quiet plague. If you see it, warm, murky, with a tang you can't place, don't drink it. Don't touch it. Don't taste it. Don't think it's just water. Walk away, because once it's in you, it owns you. The voices start, the hands rise, and you're theirs. Thomas survived, but barely. He still tastes it, bitter in his dreams, burning in his blood. The water's out there now in some forgotten pipe or spring, waiting for the next throat. People whisper about it, how it moves, how it claims you when you're thirsty. Don't be that thirsty. If you're in an old hospital, a basement, anywhere, and you find that water, warm, wrong, leave it be. It's not just liquid. It's a grave, alive with the dead, and it wants you next. The taste isn't rust, it's them. So here's the rule. Don't drink this water. Not in Crestwood, not anywhere. It's out there now, flowing silent until you take a sip. Ignore that thirst. Run instead. Because if you feel that burn, it's already too late. If you're ever in California, don't trust old pipes. Don't drink anything that feels alive, especially not water that tastes like blood. It's not a leak, it's a lure, and it's hunting. You've been warned, heed it, or join the faces in the deep. That hum isn't pipes, it's them. Crestwood's gone, but the water isn't. It's still out there waiting for you to drink. Don't do it, ever, or it'll drink you instead, and it won't let go. Thomas knows, he still chokes on it some nights, warm and bitter. The water's patient and it's clever. It'll pool in springs, pipes, anywhere you might find it. Don't give it a chance. That warmth hides more than heat. It hides a hunger, waiting to fill you. So listen well. Don't drink this water. Leave it where it flows, or it'll take you where you can't breathe. It's waiting out there now, murky and silent, until you make the mistake. Don't let it be you. If you hear that hum, soft, wet calling, run, run, and don't stop, because the water doesn't just quench, it consumes. And once it does, you're one of them, another face in its endless tide. Don't drink this water, ever. It's not worth the sip, not worth the risk. It's a flood forged with the lost, and it's still out there, waiting for you to taste. Heed this, or join Thomas in the burn. That taste isn't metal, it's them. California's wild, but the water is wilder. It's hunting still, patient and warm, it's murk hiding until you drink too deep. Don't do it. Leave it be, or it'll take you too. The hum never stops, not until you're theirs. Crestwood's a ruin, but the water's alive. It's out. They're waiting for your lips, don't give it them. That drip isn't a leak, it's a call from the deep, so hear me now, don't drink this water. It's not a quench, it's a claim. And once it claims you, there's no spitting it out. It's waiting still, somewhere damp and dark, for you to sip again. If you feel that thirst, run. Run fast, because the water doesn't ask, it takes. And it's taken too many already. Don't be next. That burn is a trap and the hands are rising. Don't drink this water, leave it untouched, or it'll touch you back forever. It's out there now, warm and waiting until you make the choice. Choose wisely. The water's alive and it's thirsty. It'll wait as long as it needs. Don't give it a drop, don't give it you. That taste is a lie, and the deep is full. So one last time, don't drink this water. It's not worth it. Nothing is. It's still out there waiting for you to slip. Don't slip. You've heard the curses that haunt these hospitals. Now the shadows are watching. Escape their grasp by subscribing to us Mysteries Beyond Death, liking this video, and hitting the bell so you never miss a tale. Comment below. Which curse would you fear most? Don't let them pull you in, join us, or the next whisper might be yours.